I have run a lot of TTRPGs in the past year. In fact, in this past year, getting away from D&D, I've been DMing more in this past year, year and a half, and doing different systems more this past year and a half than ever in my entire DMing career. So today, I want to tell you about one that's become my absolute favorite. That being Delta Green by Arc Dream Publishing. Delta Green is an offshoot of the Call of Cthulhu role-playing system, and this thing is just a hoot. First of all, let's say you're a D&D only DM. If this is your first system outside of D&D, you're in for a treat, and also, this is really going to flex your brain as somebody who might not prep or ad-libs a lot of their sessions. The Call of Cthulhu system, for the uninitiated, is a percentile-based dice system where you roll D100s and try to hit under a threshold. The system itself isn't complicated, it's easy to pick up and learn. Of course, you can always get more complex with these things. Mechanically, how the system is built makes rolling incredibly tense, and failures become common. High-level D&D characters are going to stomp everything they come across. High-level PCs in the Call of Cthulhu system may fail regularly. They may have skills that they just didn't practice at all. This makes for great mechanical tension, and ultimately it enhances the horror side of things at the table. Now, Call of Cthulhu in particular is a great time if you haven't done so, and if you're more of a fantasy-based person, this might be more up your alley. It makes for good, hard-boiled 1920s fun. It'll run the gambit from flappers to swing dancing, blimps, small towns, shadowy dark secrets. Usually the characters in Call of Cthulhu games are investigators, PIs, journalists, and historians. It typically involves these characters for personal reasons, and for me as a DM coming off of D&D, I found this kind of difficult, as each player need to have their own thing, own secret. There wasn't really an adventurer label or edge runner label to tie all of them together. I also found modern settings to be more of my favorite, or low-tech sci-fi stuff like Cyberpunk Red. I'm also a huge horror and true crime person, so Delta Green comes in very clutch as somebody who just saw some True Detective. Speaking of, Delta Green is the unholy mashup of X-Files, Laundry Files, True Detective, Shadow over Innsmouth, and Southern Reach. Now, I omitted a very popular one from there, which is the SCP universe, from the comparison list, because the Foundation's operation isn't like Delta Green's at all once you get into the weeds of it. Now, if I actually had to use SCP, which is the just humongous fictional universe, Delta Green is a lot more like the global occult coalition from the SCP universe. Since the raid on Innsmouth, for example, Delta Green has been protecting the United States from the paranormal. They operate primarily within the US. They're like the FBI, not the CIA. The setting is pretty fluid with multiple timelines and canons, so really just read up on it a bit and take what you like and toss what you don't for your own stories. For example, in prepping to run this campaign, I did a few things. Now, I personally wanted a private organization like the Foundation or like Umbrella from Resident Evil, and I also liked the idea of Delta Green being a government agency and being in opposition with Majestic 12, which is another agency or secret society in the setting. Now, a recent love of mine has been Home Safety Hotline, which if you haven't played it, you definitely should, and it introduces a really fun concept. What if fantasy creatures were real? So I've been toying around with that idea for my campaign, and it's a lot of fun. I even took some of the writing from Vampire the Masquerade to add more, since the Special Affairs Division in that universe basically works as the governmental division that deals with the paranormal in that setting. I basically wanted other stuff aside from fishy tentacled horrors, and this provided me a lot of leeway and legroom to really just take lore from other things that I enjoy and throw it into Delta Green, and it fits perfectly. Plus, immortality and achieving that seems like something the Karyotechia would be interested in, and the whole secret society of fascists thing definitely ties in with a lot of the themes that you could get in VTM and where some of the vampires ended up setting their allegiances. All of this makes for some very timely role-playing in the world where we all live now with all these conspiracies and ideas of secret societies, and particularly secret societies of fascists. I know the Karyotechia technically aren't around anymore in the setting. I'm just saying that the philosophy has gotten mighty popular, so they could easily be villains in your campaign. Which, just TLDR on who the Karyotechia are, they're basically like the guys who search for, like, magic weapons and they're Nazis. Anyway, this is an excellent setting for exploring conspiracies if you couldn't tell, and also it ties it great with Lovecraft mythos. It's honestly phenomenal. It is true detective, the first season, especially with many of the pre-written scenarios, which run pretty much just like true detective. I've been running a mix of my own stories with the pre-writtens, which are all very well done, and I'll leave a link to some of my favorites below. It's some of the most fun I've had DMing in a really long time. Now, let's say you're a DM, and let's say that you've only done D&D. You might be wondering why this should be the game that you run next that's not D&D. What's in it for you, and what makes this game so good? Well, I think it kind of encourages a new lateral kind of thinking for your prep. Prep is something a lot of DMs go through, and many of them struggle with. Now, in D&D, when you prep, you're planning encounters, NPCs, maps, and if you're doing it digitally, you add tokens and images, and you could guess what happens next. In Delta Green, you set up mysteries. So you actually need a lot more upfront prep, but once the prep is done, you don't really need to go back and change it because the mystery is already set up and you know what the clues are. I think a murder is a really good one to start with. It's a nice, typical kind of scenario. So you, as the handler, which is what they call the DM in this setting, should know the ins and outs of the case that you're going to be running with your agents, the players, before they even start to solve the case. So you should know pretty much the ins and outs of what happened, who killed who, and what went on. The reason you want to do these things in advance and prep it and plan it all in advance is so that way you can avoid creating inconsistencies or contradictory facts that can hurt the experience. Because, my gosh, I've never had my players really take notes, but this got them to take some of the most detailed notes I've ever seen them take in the entirety of me playing with them and my table. You don't need to be overly complicated, but you do need to plan the crime from start to finish. After that, the prep is planting crumbs to follow as each scene gets run through. You want to give people the aha moments and a mystery to unravel, which is a lot of fun and totally different from the usual kill a monster, go to a dungeon thing. I've made fake government documents for this game. I've photoshopped images of horror and all these things that related to ongoing cases in the game. They're all a little abnormal, but they're all within the realm of possibility. The prep is less NPC encounters and improv, and it's more scenario driven, which has made me a better planner for D&D. Another thing that I particularly like is that it gets me to think about aids. Play aids are something that don't really come up that much in D&D play. I've never really used play aids, but the idea of documents or video footage or audio footage has actually been a really interesting storytelling device for me as a DM and encourages me to do things that I wouldn't normally do in a D&D game. It makes me think about the world in a much more different way than I would in D&D. It makes me more granular, more tactile, as a way to put it. The characters that people play are Rust and Marty of True Detective. The players in this setting are professionals. They're not gumshoe nobodies. These are people that work as government agents or homicide detectives. You use your brain, and you could be hallucinating from trauma on the job, or that could be the Yellow King calling you to Carcosa. The horror in the pre-writtens is actually very well done, very cosmic, very sci-fi, just a lot of great stuff. It's honestly some of the best modern horror writing I've seen in a long time, and there is a lot of really bad horror writing out there. Your players will be freaked out, disgusted, enthralled. The players are going to enjoy this, and if they've never watched X-Files or their Zoomers, and if you've ever wanted to play some SCP, you could definitely design the system to do that for you. It has that feeling mechanically. The setting just enhances the dice rolling, I'd argue. It's been my favorite horror TTRPG to run. I enjoy the horror that's associated with Strahd, but the mafia power games, the crime, the cults, all that stuff that goes on in here is really good. You're primarily going to be fighting guys with guns, and the things that actually go bump in the night could tear you apart on a molecular level. So when they come up, it should be something special. You shouldn't be running into some Cthulhu god every single day of the week, and when you do run into it, well, shit's going to hit the fan. An important thing to note is that you should not be running this with a huge group. You should be running it with a small group. Delta Green is definitely one of those things that can get emotionally intense, so you find people that you're comfortable with and you run it. I also recommend running Last Things Last, which is the introduction scenario to introduce players to Delta Green. It has some aids, and I won't spoil it, but I'll leave a playthrough that you can listen to from Get in the Trunk by Glass Cannon Network. It's the perfect playthrough of it, and it's really a great way to show that this is a good horror RPG that you could get into and get really, really intense with emotionally. Another recommendation for a longer series adventure in Delta Green is Puppet Shows and Shadow Plays, which sees the players investigating a series of disappearances on an Apache reservation. This is definitely longer than Last Things Last. Last Things Last for my group was a single session. Puppet Shows and Shadow Plays has been about a month-long campaign for us. And the Foundry editions of all of the Delta Green stuff are actually really good. I think more RPGs should actually just be integrating Foundry into their production pipeline because it is by far the de facto tool for online VTT play. The Foundry edition of Puppet Shows comes with tokens, all the evidence, it comes with digital editions of the book. Delta Green has a great digital edition of the rules as well. This is just, more things need to do this. They just do. But yeah, all these things that I've described, the pre-writtens, these are not for younger groups. These are not for the sensitive. Puppet Shows can see players dealing with tense tribal relations between the Apache and the U.S. government, echoing back to the mistreatment of Native Americans. All of this stuff is very political espionage. So you should be comfortable addressing these issues at the table. These are things that come up, and honestly, they make for good storytelling. So it should be at the table. You shouldn't take it out. It's part of the experience with Delta Green. I mean, a lot of these things are real-world conspiracies, atrocities, and bigotry. I mean, adrenochrome being sucked from bodies is powerful people abusing their position. You've heard that conspiracy theory. If you spent on time, you've heard a lot of the conspiracy theories that Delta Green pulls from. If you want to run this, you want people that you're comfortable with as a DM and as a player. You have to take it seriously, by the way. Delta Green becomes really, really morbid if you take it as a comedy show. I think Delta Green is a really good test of your mechanical and thematic knowledge as a DM. I've ran about 15 hours of it by now, and I honestly can't wait to explore more. I have God's Teeth, and I'm looking to run that with my players, and I am really excited, and I hear it's really tense and really messed up, but boy oh boy, can I not wait. Tell me if you've ran Delta Green, and tell me some of your stories down below in the comments. Make sure to subscribe and hit that bell for more RPG content.